Hello and welcome to the Musical Instrument Investigator. Today we're on the website of Aguttes Auctions based in France, and we're going to have a look at a very special violin that will be coming up in an auction on the 3rd of June 2022. Now this particular auction I believe will have other violins and bows in it, but there is one particular instrument that we are going to have a look at today. So this auction house will be selling a violin by Bartolomeo Giuseppe Guarneri, also known as Del Gesù. This is a very, very rare Cremonese violin from 1736. And now the last time an instrument was sold by this maker, it was in 2012. So it was 10 years ago now, the last time that that an instrument by this particular maker was sold. So that's really quite interesting. And this particular maker is regarded by many to be equal to Stradivari in terms of kind of quality of sound of instruments. Some people may kind of be more leaning to Stradivari, others may be more leaning to Del Gesù, but still an extremely important maker. And what makes Del Gesù a little bit different is that whereas the Stradivari workshop is known to have made kind of around about 1,000 or so violins and also lots of other instruments, Del Gesù, the instruments that he made, it's sub kind of 200, so there's a lot less Del Gesù violins around. And as I said, like if you're a kind of a top professional, the field is kind of really split between those who prefer the Stradivari sound or the Del Gesù sound, which is often referred to as a bit kind of a bit stronger and a bit darker, perhaps. There are obviously some that will state that Stradivari is the top maker and Del Gesù is second to Stradivari, but then there's a lot of kind of discussions. But for our intents and purposes, we'll kind of say that this maker is kind of on a par with Stradivari. And it's interesting that we had the video before about the Stradivari coming to auction, and now we have a Del Gesù. So I thought it would be kind of interesting to look at this a bit more closely. So Aguttes have produced this kind of 40-page document talking about the instrument, so we're going to have a look at that a bit more closely. I just thought I'd quickly go onto the Terezio Cosio archive just to kind of show you the price history here. So we see that the last time an instrument was sold was by Terezio in 2012, June the 25th, and it sold for £1.5 million or 2.3 million US dollars. So this is 10 years ago now, so that's kind of the level of pricing that we're looking at the moment. Before we kind of delve in again to the actual brochure, we can really quickly just read this Strad article about this auction just to give us a brief overview. So here they say a €4 million 1736 Guarneri del Gesù to be auctioned. Aguttes auction house will present the instrument on 3rd of June, the first Guarneri to be auctioned in over a decade. French violinist Regis Pasquier will part with his 1736 Guarneri del Gesù in an auction held by Aguttes auction house on the 3rd of June, expected to fetch a price between 4 million and 4.5 million euros. It is the first Guarneri violin to be auctioned for over a decade and the first violin from the maker's middle period to be acquired by an auction house in the 21st century. So there you go, it's quite rare. The instrument sports a one-piece flamed maple back. The two-piece soundboard is made of regular fine-board spruce. The scroll and splint are made of regular medium-wave maple with orange-brown varnish on a gold background. We are grateful to have the privilege to offer this exceptional instrument at auction and to pursue its story by finding it a new owner, commented Florent Boyer, expert violin maker at Aguttes. So just a bit about the man. I'm sure that we'll see this in the document as well. Born in 1945, Pasquier has played the violin for over 20 years in numerous concert halls around the world. He believes that parting with the violin is an important transition to the next generation, offering the young musicians of today the opportunity to discover the instrument and by contributing to sound potential that's already crossed the centuries. This instrument on its own, it has an exceptional resonance, says Pasquier. He recalls being won over by the instrument immediately. With his wife's support, he purchased the violin and performed on it the following day. So that's quite interesting. So yeah, they're saying here the estimate is 4 to 4.5 million euros. So 10 years on from the last sale price, which seems interesting. So it sold for 1.8 million euros, or a similar violin sold for 1.8 million euros back in 2012. I think that this may go a lot higher personally. As you may have seen many videos before, in private sales things go kind of quite a bit over sometimes the auction prices, and I believe that potentially some of the Del Gesùs are maybe kind of trading in the 10 to 15 million range already at private sales. I could be completely wrong, or maybe even higher. So I would expect that potentially we could see this going a bit higher, potentially to maybe between 7 to 10. I mean, I could be completely wrong, but it'd be interesting to watch that in the future. But anyway, this just all reinforces that this is a really important violin that's going for auction. So without further ado, because I've been waffling on a bit, let's have a look at this this document they have here. Once same deal as the kind of the recent video about Stradivari. We're just documenting this just in case it disappears and just for people's interest, and we're not trying to infringe on anyone's kind of copyright or anything. So yeah, let's have a look. There's some kind of a detailed picture there. This is just about kind of general contact and when the actual auction is, so we don't need to go into that too much. So here we have a bit more detailed information, so we'll start. I'll read this out like my kind of audio book here. 3 cities in northern Italy are associated with the work of the Guarneri family: Cremona, Mantua and Venice, were three cities that each represented a different type of social life characteristics of the 17th and 18th century Italy. Venice was one of the greatest powers of Europe. Mantua was the seat of a duke who compensated for his small territory by maintaining a magnificent court. Cremona was a small provincial town like many others, with no political or social importance. After a period as a free and independent city from 1082 to 1335, it had passed into the hands of the Visconti and remained in the possession of the Duchy of Milan. In the early years of the Renaissance, it had its own school of painters, whose style mainly drew on the traditions of Venice, but which lost its significance in the history of painting and architecture in the mid-16th century. Through the Treaty of Cateau Cambrensis, 1559, the Duchy of Milan came under Spanish rule, holding not only the Kingdom of Milan but also that of Naples and Sardinia. Spain became the main influence in Italy until it was later ceded to the Austrians after the War of 1700. During its 140 years of Spanish rule, Italy dazzled in the history of music. Spain may have dominated Italy politically, but Italy's music dominated the world. The history of Italian music in the 17th century is inseparably linked with the great Italian violin makers. As opera became ever more prevalent throughout Italy, the demand for violins rose accordingly. The overall popularity of music naturally affected the commercial production of all kinds of musical instruments, but the violin's supremacy was very close linked with the artistic character of the music itself. The 17th century was the century of Baroque architecture, and the violin was a typically Baroque instrument. And we'll move on a bit as well. In this context, Cremona saw the emergence of the new tradition of violin making and the invention of the modern violin by Andrea Amati in 1505 to 1577, that's circa. He certainly started out by making plucked instruments, but then concentrated with unprecedented consistency on the violin family. He introduced decisive innovations to contemporary models which were structurally rooted in the late Middle Ages, it is thus highly likely that the benefits in terms of sound and the pioneering aspect of the instruments played a key role in his hugely successful workshop. This international success was largely due to the musicians who discovered Amati's instruments in Cremona and then made him known in all the countries they worked in. Andrea Amati, Amati's immediate successors were his two sons Antonio Amati, 1540 to 1607, and Girolamo Amati, 1561 to 1630, who developed their father's violin model. Then came the third generation with Niccolo Amati, 1596 to 1684. This master found himself in dire straits after the unexpected death of his father, Girolamo. Famine and plague had ravaged northern Italy, and after Maggini in Brescia also succumbed to the disease in 1632, Niccolo Amati ran the only top-quality violin-making workshop in Italy. He became famous for developing an even more innovative model than his grandfather, known as the Grand Pattern. It was larger and featured lower arching and increased tension. In combination with higher ribs, this achieved a new, more powerful sound and thus met the requirements of the contemporary performances involving multiple choruses and large orchestras. This fundamental reinterpretation ensured the workshop's economic successes, enabling it to weather the crisis. Above all, it provided the basic model for the subsequent instruments of the Cremona school. Niccolo Amati also made history as a teacher and was a master to whom the great names of the Cremona school owed their training and inspiration. Although there is little evidence that they were apprenticed in his workshop, Niccolo Amati's formative influence on Francesco Ruggieri, Andrea Guarneri, the first member of this family, and Antonio Stradivari was indisputable, and established Cremona as the world capital of violin making we know today. So that's just a bit of a brief overview of some of the history of violin making here. Now we see obviously pictures of the instrument in question itself. So it's a nice picture of the front, the back, and the scroll. If we zoom in a bit, then we'll be able to hopefully see this a bit better. It's a nice document actually. You can see the work on the scroll. So we can read some more things here. Bartolomeo Giuseppe Guarneri del Gesù, 1698 to 1744, Cremona, 1736. This instrument, complete in all its main parts, has a beautiful one-piece flamed maple back. The two-piece soundboard is made of regular fine-poured spruce. The scroll and splinter are made of regular medium-wave maple, and the varnish is orange-brown on a gold background. Measurement on the back, 13.81 inches. Estimate is 4 to 4.5 million euros. As I said, I would be curious to see if that may actually go a bit higher, but we'll obviously have to watch the auction in June to see. But it certainly looks like a very beautiful instrument. So, the Guarneri del Gesù, the Pasquier, Cremona 1736. Bartolomeo Giuseppe Guarneri, aka del Gesù, younger son of Giuseppe Giovanni Guarneri, filius Andrea, 1666 to 1739 or 40, and grandson of Andrea Guarneri, circa 1623-26 to 1698, is the best known of the Guarneri dynasty. His uncle Pietro Giovanni, Pietro I, 1655 to 1720, who worked in Mantua, and his brother Pietro II, 1695 to 1762 or 3, who worked mainly in Venice, were also famous violin makers. Giuseppe Guarneri del Gesù learned this art of violin making in his father's workshop between 1714 and 1722. His first known instruments date from the late 1720s. In 1722, Giuseppe married Caterina Roda, a native of Vienna, Austria. It is assumed that the couple lived in Cremona from 1722 to 1728. During this period, Giuseppe seemed to have abandoned violin making. In 1730, he took over the workshop of his father, who was weakened by illness. Experimentation and personal expression seemed to be his guiding principles at the time. And we can see a bit of more of a close-up there of the front and the back of the instrument. And there's a Niccolo Paganini picture, and that's the Canona Paganini, the violin that Paganini was using. So His short life and limited output make Guarneri del Gesù instruments harder to find than Stradivarius or Amati, which gives them a particular value and interest beyond their intrinsic worth. So here we go, as I was saying, that there's not so many instruments. According to most estimates, there are approximately 150 of these instruments still in existence, a small figure compared with Stradivari's output of 1,000 odd instruments. Nonetheless, this equates to about 10 instruments made during each of the 16 years of his career as a craftsman, which can be divided into three distinct periods: the period as his father's assistant, the middle period when he was at the height of his maturity, and finally when what some call the impulsive period. The middle period resulted in some of Del Gesù's most attractive work, considered the most enigmatic and least understood of the great Cremonese masters. His instruments remained largely within Italy until Niccolò Paganini's first European tour in 1828. Well aware of the expressive power of these instruments, he dazzled audiences from Vienna to Strasbourg with his 1743 Guarneri il Canone. Musicians, collectors and dealers sought out other instruments by the same maker with their unique tone. So that's kind of just clarifying some of the points that I raised earlier, and here we see some more detailed images on the side. I'm sure when the actual auction catalogue comes out we can revisit these pictures again, but for now it's good to see the instrument. And we see here the key influence in the Del Gesù instruments of this period was no longer that of his father, but of his contemporary in Cremona, Antonio Stradivari. Although Filius Andrea did not ignore the innovative ideas of Stradivari, his roots were deeply established in the Amati tradition, with its relatively high curved arching and short, elegant F-holes with narrow wings. As Count Cosio observed, Del Gesù's violins were clearly modelled on Stradivari instruments, with low, flat, powerful arching and distinctive wide F-holes which extended wings. However, the general outline remained true to the Amati form, and although the execution became freer and later considerably freer, this model, passed down through three generations of the Guarneri family, remained the basis for all his subsequent work. Our violin, made in 1736, is a perfect example, inspired by a flatter model with full tout arching. Giuseppe broke with the family tradition here. It is a fine imitation of Stradivari, with fairly wide F-holes, a light subtle touch, and a fully developed tonal direction with strong thicknesses of the wood. Del Gesù also remained faithful to Amati's construction principles, with the same pins marking out an internal structure, and thus almost certainly the very same technical method. So that's kind of interesting to see how the influence there. We see some more images here. So there's some other examples of Del Gesù instruments: 1734 Violon de Diable, 1735 Plowden, and here's the Pasquier there, and then you get a close-up there of the F-holes there as well. So a very good document. There's a bit more of a close-up there of the F-holes and the back. So the instrument was developed on a short model he had been using since the early 1730s, with a body measuring 13.81 inches, a table of around 164 millimeters, and a back of 205 millimeters. The 1734 Devil's Violin and various instruments of 1735, the King Plowden and De Aiguille, have the same proportions. It is extraordinary to realise that all the different models and styles created by Del Gesù probably came from a single mould, freely used in exploiting the remarkable flexibility of the Cremonese internal form to the maximum. The use of wood for the table, with a very fine regular grain up to the edge, illustrates an interesting preoccupation of Del Gesù. We also find a beautiful one-piece back with soft, even, medium waves rising from the treble to the bass. In fact, the wood used by Del Gesù was far more consistently well figured than that of Stradivari, who frequently used quite plain pieces. This seems to refute the idea that he was working in poverty. In fact, he regularly used very handsome one-piece backs during this period. That's some interesting information. So Peter Ratcliffe's dendrochronological study of the wood used for the table indicates a last visible ring on the bass side from 1723 and on the treble side from 1724, coming from the same tree. He also brings to light a strong correlation with other woods already present in instruments by Del Gesù, Stradivari and Guarneri. Considered a major characteristic of his style, the F holes are very changeable with Del Gesù. Each time he altered something in comparison with the previous ones, making them more and more fanciful and cutting them longer and longer. The sound of the Pasquier are similar to those of the 1734 Violon du Diable and the 1735 Plowden. They are positioned more vertically with wider spacing and also have a much wider wing at the top and bottom, showing a certain similarity between his models and those of Stradivari and standing apart from his Amati heritage. We can sense a real freedom of expression Guarneri was able to indulge. This is what makes Del Gesù the alternative genius of Cremona, the yin to the yang of Stradivari. Until now, Cremoni's violin making had been characterized by consistency in terms of not only a very high level of craftsmanship, but also of style and model. The differences between an Andrea Amati made in 1566 and Niccolo Amati of 1686 or even a Strad of 1726 are technically significant but small given the time span. As with many families of violin makers, it is almost impossible to define the change in work from father to son. From the Amati family onwards, the sons provided assistance to their fathers, becoming more and more confident and independent as they grew older. What is particularly interesting about the early Guarneri violins, up to 1733, is the shape of the scroll. Del Gesù worked to a totally original model, narrow across the front face and the first turn, with delicate chamfers and details. These scrolls are a considerable departure from the forms used by Andrea, the Pietros of Venice and Mantua, and Giuseppe Filius Andrei, which are very consistent with each other. We get to see a few certificates here, so some comparisons of scrolls: that 1735 Leidenberg, 1736 Politzer, and here's the Pasquier there of 1736. I think this is some bits about the kind of dealer, the kind of certificates of authenticity. So you've got beer violins here, you've got Andreas Post and Sergeant Florent Boyer here. We can have a look at those in a little bit. We'll just carry on here. This changed in around 1733 when his father seemed to have become incapacitated. For several years until about 1737, the elder Giuseppe appears to have supplied scrolls for his son, perhaps because he was too ill to carry out larger scale work. This is also evident in this instrument, with its somewhat heavily worked scroll. The scrolls of this middle period revert to the familiar Guarneri type, with a wide second turn and distinctive comma tail. As with the 1735 King or the 1736 Politzer Kostler, the model, although it changes from one instrument to another, is also very similar to 1735 Leidenberg Odnoposov, which has a direct, unrounded neck, as with the scroll on the Pasquier. The delicacy of Del Gesù's varnish is an integral part of his charm. Unfortunately, this is why so many of his violins have little or no original varnish. Because they have been intensively played over such a long period, this has worn off, so the instruments have needed an application of protective varnish and regular polishing. By increasing its refractive index, polishing tends to enhance the apparent transparency of a varnish. The Pasquier has lost most of its colours, and those that remain are found entirely in the wood and base coat. The result is a very pale and delicate shade of amber, like many of Del Gesù's instruments, perhaps because any pigments present have faded. So that's quite interesting, why a lot of these kind of older instruments have that kind of pale amber kind of colour, is because they've actually lost a lot of their kind of original varnish, or the colour in the varnish. So let's just have a look at this kind of certificate of authenticity from Andreas Post. This is from 1998. I certify that the violin in possession of Mr. Regis Pasquier, 40 Rue Montesquieu, Scrivy, 92600 and Signier, France, is a fine old Italian instrument, in my judgment the work of the celebrated Joseph Guarneri del Gesù of Cremona, dated 1733-4. The back in one piece of beautiful fugal maple, with the broad flames ascending from left to right, the sides of maple matching the wood of the back. The scroll also of similar maple, the table in two pieces of spruce with fine grain. At the centre, opening towards the flanks, the varnish of a warm orange colour on a golden ground. This violin is a fine and characteristic example of the maker's work and measures 35.1 in length of body with widths of 16.45 and 20.4 centimeters. Interesting. And then we have kind of a French certificate there from this is recent, April 2022, from Serge and Florent Boyer, which seems to be saying pretty much the same thing. 351 length of back. They give it this current slightly later date of 1734 to 1736, but all intents and purposes the same. Then we have from the end of last year, from October 2021, we have Beer violins in Tunbridge in Kent. So this is Charles Beer, the kind of famed violin expert. We certify that the violin in possession of Regis Pasquier of Paris, France, is in our judgment a fine old Italian instrument, the work of the celebrated Giuseppe Guarneri del Gesù of Cremona. It dates from circa 1736. The back in one piece of maple with flames of medium width sloping upwards from left to right. The sides in scroll with narrower flames. A table and two pieces of spruce with grain of medium width narrower towards the centre. The varnish of a warm orange-brown colour on a golden ground. This violin is a very good and characteristic example of the maker's work. It measures 35.1 centimetres bare in the length of body with a width of 16.5 bare and 20.4 centimetres. So they all kind of agree there, so I guess that's positive. Here I think we're starting to talk a bit more about kind of Pasquier here, and most of that's in French, but you can obviously have a look at this yourself and kind of read some of these kind of news articles, but we'll read about the man here. An exceptional violin for an exceptional artist. At the age of 14, Regis Pasquier was already invited as soloist for a tour alongside the greatest American orchestras. Born in Fontainebleau, France, the young prodigy is given his first violin at 4 years old. When his father offers him his first violin made out of iron, the young Regis flattened it with a hammer because the instrument looked too much like a toy. The child wished for a real instrument. This is what his parents, who teach at the time at the American School of Art of Fontainebleau, finally gave him. With derogation, Regis Pasquier entered the Paris Conservatoire at the age of 9 and graduated at 12 with the first prize in violin and chamber music. His meeting with two legendary artists, Isaac Stern and Zeno Francescatti, had a considerable impact on his career. The latter gave Regis Pasquier the opportunity to enter the most prestigious agency of American concerts in North America, Columbia Artist Management Inc., which led him to travel the United States for 20 years, where he was in demand as a soloist by all the major North American orchestras. He played, directed by the most prestigious conductors. The first one was Laurent Mazel, with whom he toured around the US, but also Georges Pretre, Leonard Bernstein, Alan Lombard, Michael Plasson, Jean-Claude Cassadet, among his partners of chamber music, Isaac Stern, Stislav Rostropovich, Menahem Pressler, Leonard Rose, Jean-Pierre Rampal, Murray Parahia, Paul Tortelier can be named. A triple exercise in virtuosity for Regis Pasquier, who was given the title as the best violinist in the world by Michael Plasson after the introduction and Rondo Capricioso by Saint-Saëns, played more than 5 times in a row during the Besançon International Conducting Competition. Absolutely destroyed all the names there as normal, but what can we do? Here's a bit more. There's Regis Pasquier there, the violin, and he's kind of talking about it here. So Regis Pasquier and Del Gesù meet, a true revelation. Regis Pasquier played the Del Gesù in public for the first time during the Folles Journées de Nantes over 20 years ago in a double concerto for violin and cello by Brahms, with trill and walks at the cello, broadcasted by the Channel Art. I think it's going to say broadcasted. His encounter with the instrument happened the day before. Regis Pasquier remembers the true revelation that the exceptional sound power of the Del Gesù was for him. During the test session at the Salle Gaveau among a selection of 8 famous violins. At the moment of the contact between the bow and the strings, the resonance of the wooden body turned out to be immediately different and projected the sound considerably further, thus offering the possibility to play in a very large concert halls. This instrument's sound on its own, it has an exceptional resonance, says the musician. The artist still recalls with wonder something extraordinary coming out of such a small instrument. The audience was able to give each violin a grade, and our instrument received by far the highest score. The violinist was immediately won over and secured his wife's support. She encouraged him to buy it. He decided to play it in a concert the very next day without giving himself time to tame the instrument, so much so that the osmosis with the violin seemed obvious. And here's a bit more information about how what the violin has been doing. Violin prodigy Regis Pasquier has toured the world with his Del Gesù for over 20 years, mainly internationally renowned stages: Carnegie Hall, New York; Suntree Hall, Tokyo; Teatro Colón, Buenos Aires; Opera House, Sydney; Guangzhou Opera House, Canton; Grand Theatre, Quebec; Theatre des Champs-Élysées; Opera Garnier, Salle Pleyel, have welcomed this great violinist and his faithful companion, who have given an average of 70 concerts each year. We can find on records the same radiance of Regis Pasquier Violin by renowned partners as much great concertos. Mozart conducted by P. Bartolomeo Saint-Saëns, conducted by A. Lombard; Tchaikovsky conducted by E. Leduc Barome, as well as chamber music repertoire, Beethoven sonatas with Jean-Claude Pennetier, for which Pennetier and Pasquier received Victoire de la Musique Prize; Tchaikovsky, Shostakovich trios and Rachmaninoff trios with the Pasquier; Pidou, Pennetier trio, Debussy and Fauré sonatas for piano and violin with Emmanuel Strosser; Poulenc, sonatas with Emile Nomoff. Some of these recordings even involve several exceptional instruments. The Mozart concertos were recorded on a Montagnana violin with the Stradivarius and the Del Gesù. The recordings of the Beethoven sonatas, which took place over a long period of time, involved a Stradivarius and the violin that we will offer for sale. From the moment Regis Pasquier bought it, the Del Gesù contributed, thanks to its incomparable sound, to the dazzling reviews. Beyond the technical performance, Regis Pasquier has privileged the smiling or warm lyricism of the concerto, the bravura of its allegro, the expressive cantabile of the adagio, before giving free rein to the volube theme of the final rondo, the 17th caprice for solo violin, allowing to appreciate even more the sound of Regis Pasquier's Guarneri del Gesù. Okay, and then we're seeing here violin and transmission, the desire to see it played by the young and next generation. So this is a reason why he's selling it. By parting with its violin, Regis Pasquier is most and for all taking part of a transmission process to the next generation. It is important for him to offer the young musicians of today the possibility of taking over by discovering the instrument and by contributing to the diffusion of its exceptional sound potential that already crossed the centuries, a whole history of transmission. It is true that a violin of the quality of the Del Gesù is in itself a beautiful work of art, but it exists above all to make a sound. Regis Pasquier insists, moreover, on the important role of collectors, thanks to whom unique instruments reach us and can be played by the greatest. Thus, the artist thinks that an instrument such as Del Gesù observes some respects, and that it is time for him to trust another musician with the violin to keep it alive. In order to prepare for this painful breakup, Regis Pasquier is getting acquainted with a beautiful violin of the most special French craftsmanship from the 1800s. The artist points out the fusion between the musician and the instrument. So there you go, he's moved on to an 1800s French violin. I wonder if it's a Viome or something like that. It's quite curious. Here is just kind of general conditions of the sale, so it's in French, so we're not going to read that, but if you are thinking about bidding, then definitely read through that. There's some more kind of conditions of the sale. Actually, I think oh yeah, this is the English version of the conditions of the sale, but we're not going to go into that really because that's a bit too heavy. This is just their general stuff about kind of selling and their calendar of sales. This is all kind of general stuff, so I don't think there's anything. Oh, there's a nice picture there of the back. So yeah, quite an interesting document about the history, about Pasquier. You know, a lot of different kind of interesting things happening there. I've just managed to completely bastardize all of the names in that, as I normally do, because I am absolutely terrible at pronunciation. But yeah, kind of, I'll put a link to all of these pages in the description and kind of check it out. Also, as before, I'm not advertising, but the Teresio kind of Cosio archive gives you access to these kind of price histories, etc. I think if you go on it once, you can probably look at some of it as a guest, like one or two, so you can see all the different violins, pictures of the Del Gesù, etc. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of share that with you, that there's a really important rare Del Gesù violin coming up for sale, and whether or not you prefer Del Gesù to Stradivari, or you know, if you think that Stradivari is the pinnacle, or you know, you think Del Gesù is the pinnacle, this is an extremely important instrument, and one that you know, doesn't come up for sale that regularly. So I thought it was yeah, important to share. So anyway, without further ado, thanks a lot for watching. All the links will be in the description. If you have any comments, want to kind of talk about my terrible pronunciation or anything else like that, or if I've missed anything that you think I should have included, just let me know and I'll answer in the comments. So thanks a lot, and take care. Bye. Many thanks for tuning in to the Musical Instrument Investigator. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please like, subscribe and turn on notifications, and watch out for the next video coming soon.